Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof, for the 21st of July 2025. Apologies if there are some noises coming from there. I'm having my fridge freezer fixed at the moment. It's about 2 meters that way through a wall, so you're going to hear through the door drills and screws and whatnot. So apologies for that, but let's get on with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and they can be found linked in the description to the video below. This has not been released yet on the socials, but I believe Dell, who compiles these stats with Dell stats, are linked in the description as well below. Well worth checking out. Gives you the summary of what has been lost throughout the war, and all the data is compiled into this Excel spreadsheet. He has the stats up at the moment. So we have 1,170 personnel lost. It's a pretty decent number, up in the middle of the 1,000 to 1,300 range that I talk about so often. 2 tanks, 7 troop carrying AFVs, so both of those typically below average. 54 artillery systems, again over double the daily average, a good haul there. 1 multiple launch rocket system, an anti-aircraft warfare system. We've got 132 vehicles and fuel tanks, that's pretty decent, and 2 pieces of special equipment. Now, we have a 30-day rolling average record, as you can see highlighted in yellow there, 191.97. That's for drones. That means on average, every night or every day and night for the last month, for the last 30 days, the Ukrainians have received 192 drones effectively into their airspace. The Russians have been flooding the airspace consistently. Last night was another really heavy night of Russian drones, and that is, I think, pretty unsustainable for the Ukrainians. They absolutely have to do something about that. I've done a couple of videos over the last 24 hours talking about the Yelabuga in Tatarstan, that is the Yelabuga drone manufacturing facility. That has to be target number 1 for the Ukrainians. So anyway, some fairly typical stats for recent times, but well worth keeping our eye on, the averages and the trends. In fact, if we pop into, you can't actually see where I was showing it to you there it is, 191.97. If we look at the drone trend here, we can see it is going very, very steeply at the moment, and the steeper the graph, the more drones you are seeing. So the blue line gives you in fact, I'll get rid of my face, should I? The blue line gives you a total number of drones that are sent. So as it is shallower, that suggests that there are fewer drones being added on each successive day. And the steeper it gets, the more drones are being added on each successive day. And these orange bars are each day of drones. And we have 324 from not last night, but that was a recent one. That was a record. Remember, these are just the drones that are shot down, intercepted, taken out with electronic warfare. These are not the total numbers of drones sent in each day. I'd love to see this the data for that. And the purple dotted line gives you a trend line. As you can see, it's getting steeper and steeper. It's getting worse and worse. That's why the 30-day rolling average is where it is at the moment. Okay, so let's go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list. This is for July the 19th. So he's kind of 1 day in arrears. This is 2 days ago. And as you can see, the Ukrainians losing more, but they do have rather a few more pieces of comms equipment. If you take that out for both sides, it starts looking a little bit more equal. And actually, the Ukrainians are losing more civilian vehicles over that 24-hour period than the Russians. So that's quite significant too. Russians heavier on the all-terrain vehicles, things like your motorcycles and your buggies and quads and whatnot. Okay, let's look at the individual nations and what they have lost. We'll pretty much ignore all of those pink entries into the ledger there, because I don't think they're as valuable. And in fact, UGVs as well. So it is interesting to see how many UGVs are getting lost. But again, I wouldn't compare that to the larger pieces of kit. However, we're probably going to see, I mean, it is really interesting to get this data, because I think we're going to see so many of these. If he does really enter every single UGV loss, you are going to see an awful lot of these on a daily basis now, because the Ukrainians are trying to replace human beings with these, so they don't lose human beings. And where you're obviously not going to get each human being listed on here, although it's worth noting that he does in fact do that with regard to the 100% known KIA, killed in action, for the Russians. He's got 93 lost in that day. So that's on the socials, on the videos published on the socials. He can see that 93 Russians have definitely died. Well, if you are trying to replace your human beings with UGVs, as the Ukrainians are, then, you know, wow, that you're going to see that equivalent amount of UGVs lost as people, you know, arguably, or, you know, it's going to be up there. So here we have one of them's a USV, unmanned sea vehicle, but otherwise UGVs. And I think you're going to see more and more and more of these as the Ukrainians scale up their production and use them more and more to replace humans. Right. We've got a 2S22 Bogdana self-propelled gun destroyed. And as I've said many times before, you're going to see more and more of those on the list, because they are producing them at a rate now. I mean, last number was 40 a month, was it? And that is really good, because that's probably better than just simple replacement rates for self-propelled guns. So I don't think they are going to be producing more than they're losing. And if that's the case, then that's a really good sign for self-propelled guns. What they need is production facilities in Ukraine for tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. They don't have that. Okay, APCs and MRAPs. You've got Kozaks, Oncillas, Novators. So some of their own produced vehicles. You've got M113 Max Pro, American produced ones there, some of them fairly old, the M113, so on and so forth. Not too many pieces of kit on the list there. And then an awful lot of civilian vehicles thrown on to the list for the Ukrainians. Interesting, they've got an ANTPQ-50 decoy. Those are the radars they put on top of like Humvees. I presume you can have them a standalone as well. Let's have a look. ANTPQ-50, and you'll see what I mean. So in fact, there's a good image of it. Let's get the images up there. So on top of a Humvee, indeed, or a similar vehicle, you can see that it's a fairly sizable piece of kit, but they are also clearly making decoys of them, which is pretty interesting. Okay, right, that's the Ukrainian list. Let's go into the Russian list, see what the value of the stuff they've lost is. Now at the top you can see this is bad news for the Russians. They have 2 damaged air defense system pieces, and these are S300s. S300s are a decent bit of kit, right? And I'm going to talk to you about how they are a decent bit of kit in a second. The Russians now have the S400 and indeed the S500 in prototype form, but the S300, the S300V, I think, is the updated version of that. You've got a transporter erector launcher taken out, and a transporter erector launcher and radar taken out. So 2 components of an air defense battery probably, and that might be from, do we have the radars? Yes. So this is all coming from that video I showed you yesterday, which was either in Crimea or in Donetsk. I've heard both stated, and that was a video of some really high value equipment. So this loss list today for the Russians is way worse than the Ukrainians, right? So the Russians here, just with these 2 bits of kit there, that's more valuable than the entire Ukrainian list, I would have thought. But it's not just those 2. You've got these destroyed radars, the Podyot, the P-18, the Podyot, the Nobium, and another Podyot. So 3 Podyots. Wow. I mean, let's go and see how much they are worth just in replacement cost value. But of course, like I've said before, if you can't make these things, then the value is somewhat academic. Okay, so a little bit of research gives us some numbers. Treat these all with a pinch of salt, of course. So the Nobium radar system is about 4.5 million. We've got the Podlet is 5 million, and the P-18 is 7.5 million. Wow. So you add those up, you've got 5, 10, 15, that's 19, and then that's $27 million just in that section there. And then you add these S300 Telars on, and actually the S300 Telar 120 million a pop. So yes, that's only damage, but let's assume that's taken out, and then you've just got some huge losses for the Russians here. It's really going to hurt them. Okay, so coming off from them, we've got a couple of UGVs, some 3 M46s, very old bits of artillery there, D30. We've got a couple of tanks, we've got a few BMPs, and assorted armoured fighting vehicles of unknown types there, some trucks, a whole bunch of motorcycles, golf buggies and quads, and then a bunch of civilian vehicles. That is a bad day at the office of the Russian. That one montage video showed some incredibly valuable losses, as I discussed yesterday. Right, okay, moving on to some personnel issues before we get into more of the equipment. Personnel. So I talked to you yesterday about a pilot, 63-year-old pilot, having been killed somehow. And there's some more information here, although still not a massive amount. So Konstantin Oborin, head of the Odessa Aviation Club, died while carrying out a combat mission to defend Ukraine. Konstantin was a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. In 2014, risking his own life, he rescued 29 Ukrainian warriors from captivity. As part of Ukraine's first polar parachute expedition in 2000, he parachuted to the top of the planet, raised the flags of Ukraine and Odessa at the North Pole. A master parachuting five-time record holder of Ukraine, he completed over 3,000 jumps. He had 6 children, and at the age of 63, he continued to carry out combat missions and lost his life during one of them. So eternal memory. So we don't know anything about this 63-year-old still flying something, has been killed somewhere. Now, I suggested it could have been like one of those yaks flying around Odessa, because they are responsible for taking out Shahids, and maybe that's something a 63-year-old could do, but it could well be that he's actually doing combat missions still. So anyway, not sure how that happened. We also hear that a former Ukrainian organized crime official, so he's an ex-police chief, a guy called Ihor he died with no violent signs of violence, but bleeding from one ear at a Spanish complex. Now, in Spain, there is quite a big Russian diaspora community, and this is the same complex where Maxim Kuzminov was killed, was shot. Now, he was the pilot who flew his helicopter across the contact line and into Ukraine and defected, and then he went to live there in Spain, supposedly in secret, but he was warned that that's not a very sensible place to live because there are quite a lot of Russians around, and indeed he ended up being shot. And that's the same place where this former Ukrainian police chief has died. So residents question whether the location is coincidental. Then on the Russian side, another general has died in Russia. He was a commander of the 7th Airborne Division. They are involved in war crimes against civilians in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. I think he died of a heart attack, but anyway, that is a major officer who has passed away there. Then I talked to you about S300s being pretty useful. Here is, and I love looking at these notches on bits of kit. Here is a Ukrainian S300 air defense system with a list of neutralized targets, and you can't even see all of them. I mean, it goes off the side here. Just there are at least, I mean, and I'm assuming that there are 2 more there. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 helicopters, 6, 7 jets, different jets, whole host of cruise missiles, and Shahed systems, Shahed drones as well. Interesting that I wonder what drones they look almost like Luty drones of the Ukrainians use. But anyway, it does make you realize that these S300s are being used to take out drones as well, which is quite an expensive way of doing it. But yeah, S300 system showing itself to be pretty useful there for the Ukrainians. Right, here's a chart by OSINT researcher Cyrus showing visually confirmed Russian tank losses by month. For the 3rd month in a row, Russian tank losses have remained at an extremely low level and continue to decline further. This is a very significant bit of data. to suggest that the Russians are not using traditional combat assets, and they are replacing tanks with infantry fighting vehicles and APCs, and using tanks as glorified APCs. They're the track garden shed variety that I've talked so often about, and just they're not using them even as APCs. They're not even using APCs and IFVs in the way that they used to, or in the numbers that they used to. They're just motorbikes, quads, golf buggies. That seems to be the preferred article of the preferred vehicle for the Russians. All of this is happening right in the midst of a new wave of Russian offensive in which they are operating almost exclusively with infantry and light vehicles, says Enstrike there. Yeah, a good data point. Now, a nice bit of open source intelligence work here. Latest satellite imagery updates over Russia, and indeed this coordinate there refers to, I just did a little look for that, that is Lagan in Russia, which is just neighboring the Caspian Sea there, so a fair distance from Ukraine. But yeah, as you'd imagine, most places around Russia will need, or many places around Russia will need air defences, or they would be used to having air defences in times of peace. Now, the latest satellite imagery updates over Russia suggest that low altitude radars from known radar locations are being taken away. A sizable share of both the Castor 2E2 and Podlet K1 radar has been missing. Right, so we have just seen that on our list of Russian losses. There are three Podlets, that were taken out, and now we are seeing removal of such radars from deep within Russia. As you can see, other early warning radars are there, Nebo UT, Protivnik GE, but low altitude radars like the Castor 2E2 and a lower part of the picture and Podlet K1 on the higher part are missing. This place is part of the Southern Military District. Things have been more marked on both central and eastern military districts. In other words, from central Russia and eastern Russia, they are missing even more equipment. You know, Russia's such a huge country, but you know, from places around here, they are taking radars and moving them to the front line as Ukraine causes the Russians to cycle through a lot of their equipment. Things have been more marked in both the central and eastern military districts. That's a signal that the recent anti-radar campaign led by the Ukrainian intelligence is taking its toll on Russian radar infrastructure. So that's good news. Now, Intel Schizo here is referring to, we'll go to the original post by Roy. The Russians are increasingly using, and I have talked about this before, they started doing it a little bit around Kherson. They've done it near the sort of Pokrovsk area, and I have wondered why they haven't actually done this previously, the Russians. And in fact, I have suggested the Ukrainians should be doing this themselves, like rather than using drones to hit deep inside Russia, send 10 drones here, 10 drones there, and try and attack this place and that place. I think they should be reserving some drones for help for the front lines in places where it's desperate for the Ukrainians. So the Russians are increasingly using their Garand 2 or Shahid 136 long-range strike drones for tactical missions as well. With a 90-kilogram warhead, it is most of the equivalent effect of an FAB 250 guided glide bomb. Here, a Garand 2 or Garand 2 strikes a Ukrainian position 40 kilometers from the front. So this is a position in a sort of by some trees, in a little bit of a low spot there, and yeah, these one-way attack drones that are normally sent like 7 hours west of there are being used right on the front lines in the same way a guided glide bomb would be used. And I think the Ukrainians could learn from that a little bit. Now, Russians are pouring missiles and drones into the residential area of Pokrovsk. This is Pokrovsk being hit by multiple launch rockets raining down on the city, and a drone capturing that for the Russians. It is not looking too nice around Pokrovsk at the moment. Horrific scenes there from that drone. Now, the Ukrainians, on the other hand, have been hitting back over the last few days in ways where I'm just not sure what's going on because of OPSEC and the chaos of war. Right now, said Visioner yesterday, Ukrainian forces are striking Russian positions in occupied regions of Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk and Luhansk with guided aerial bombs and rocket artillery. And actually, we've had a few days of that. So the Ukrainians are doing a bit of their own kind of strikes, as well as sending quite a lot of one-way attack drones into Russia with unknown success. Like, we just don't know quite what's going on. And I've talked about this a couple of times recently, and we'll go on to this in the next section. You know, what are the Ukrainians achieving with their strikes with one-way attack drones, and are the Russians getting better at intercepting them? And there is a little bit of a theory that we'll go through at the end of this section. Okay, so last night, a heavy attack again by the Russians. You can see here 450 missiles and drones. 200 were taken out by conventional means. Or in fact, we'll go through the numbers here. So 224 were shot down or suppressed. 203 were jammed. So that's 427 by the looks of it there being intercepted. It's 403. No, how does that make sense? So the targets that were suppressed or shot down, the 224 targets, that includes missiles. So let's go to the list here. 403 out of the 426 drones that were sent in to Ukraine were taken out. That's a really good interception rate, but of course 23 drones still getting through and doing the damage, and also 403 drones falling to the ground and exploding or causing fire damage or just kinetic damage to whatever they strike. Hopefully many of those will be in the middle of the fields, but not necessarily. So 403 out of 426 taken out. 200 of those were shot down. 5 Kh-47M2 Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles were launched from Russia, and I believe all 5 were shot down. I believe all 4 Caliber cruise missiles were shot down, and in other words, I think every single missile was shot down. I'm fairly sure. Is that what Tim White said here? Kiev says all 24 missiles were shot down. 5 ballistic, 14 Kh-101, 5 other cruise missiles. 95% of the 426 drones were intercepted, which is exceptionally good as an interception rate. Vast majority of missiles were shot down by air defense firepower, says Visioner here, while the rest were jammed or lost location tracking. No information on successful hits have been reported. There are confirmed hits by 23 strike drones on 3 locations. The crashes of down drones on 12 other sites. So about 15 sites were targeted. That means the enemy attack is ongoing, etc., etc. So a really heavy night for the Ukrainians, but they've done a fantastic job of, as Tim White says, impressive air defending, of defending their airspace. Now, here's a map of where much of the activity was. 2 civilians have been killed 15 inches at the time of this person writing, but you can see, I mean, just huge numbers of drones being sent from a whole host of different places, and missiles as well. Kiev took the brunt of it, but actually Ivano-Frankivsk was the other place that was really heavily targeted, and Kharkiv too. So 3 major places, but there will be others, as you can see here. Maybe going towards Lviv, up north here. I don't know if these were on the way to somewhere like Lutsk, or there were some random targets in the north of the country, and then down here around Odessa and Mykolaiv, other places were targeted there. But essentially, really, Kiev and Ivano-Frankivsk and Kharkiv were the 3 main targets. So Zelensky says strikes are always against humanity. A kindergarten, residential buildings and other civilian infrastructure burned in Kiev. We must continue to scale up interceptors. Only real pressure on Russia can stop this aggression. And then these very striking images coming out, as often is the case with the Ukrainians and their emergency services. Kiev looked pretty smoky this morning. A reminder so far tonight, said Tim White earlier. In the previous thread, we've seen drone attacks on Moscow and notably Rostov region. So the Ukrainians have been active themselves. Train station was hit. Second time, actually, that's happened. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the first death has just been reported, he said earlier. A man's died as many fires rage in Kiev during a combined attack. And here, Kiev, after another Russian attack, once again, terror against civilians, senseless strikes, says Andrei Yermak, head of the president's office. There is a response and there will be more, but Russia must stop the fire and end this war. The only way to force Madman Putin to do that is through peace, through strength. Ukraine will keep growing stronger constantly. There will be more of our weapons. Now, this is a threat that keeps coming out. People keep saying it. I am looking forward to the time where we start seeing these weapons used. So the huge numbers of Lyuti that I think are being manufactured, hopefully ballistic and cruise missiles from the Ukrainians, but we're yet to see that in any substantive way. Lvivsky Kvartal residential complex in Kiev is on fire, as you can see there. So many places in Kiev were affected. In fact, there was a metro station where people were hiding, that the entrance got hit, and I think that's why it's so smoky in there. Consequences of a massive strike by Russia at night as of now, says Max 25. This was at 3:37 a.m. My time, so 5:37 in the morning. Kiev, many fires of a high-rise building, a house, a supermarket, a kindergarten, a shopping arcade. The entrance to the Lukyanivska metro station was damaged. It is known that one died and there are injured. And indeed, a lot of commercial property seem to have taken the brunt of last night's attack in Kiev. The aftermath of the night attack there, Russians destroyed cafes and shops. The number of injured in Kiev has risen to 7. One person was killed. I think we now know 2 have been killed and maybe 15 or so injured. But yeah, lots of residential commercial property being affected. Air Force spokesman Yuri Akhmat said Kiev's district suffered serious damage from debris of intercepted targets. We'd prefer to destroy them further from populated areas, but that's not always possible. That's a really important point, that what goes up must come down, and unfortunately they often come down in residential areas. Both aeroballistic and cruise missiles failed to reach their target, so that's really good. Excellent that they intercepted all of those missiles successfully. Russia strikes at the Tavrida gas extraction platform in the Black Sea with Kh-22 missiles. So they are using missiles to hit the gas platform there. Possibly could be because there are electronic warfare or radar systems placed on those. But anyway, cruise missiles have hit there. I don't know if they're included in the cruise missile sent and whether they were intercepted or whether they hit the gas platforms or not, but not included in that infographic, the mapping one. So just to give you a sense of what it can be like for others, here is a video of a pet owner with her dog who has to, or feels she has to, help her dog. Dogs get, what it's like on fireworks night in the UK, 5th of November, and dogs hate it. A lot of cowering dogs just from fireworks. Well, these are cruise missile and ballistic missile and Shahed drone strikes on cities like Kiev. Here, the dog gets sort of wrapped up with earmuffs on, and she plays white noise to it to calm it as these horrific attacks take place. So pets are really suffering there. And now on the Ukrainian front, drone threat to Saratov, Smolensk, Lipetsk, Tula, Moscow, Tver, Rostov, Bryansk regions and Krasnodar territory. So a lot of places, probably a lot of drones. And again, we have very little detail. What is going on? Is the OPSEC better? Are they shooting down a lot of these drones that the Ukrainians send? We're going to talk about that in this last post, because I think someone speaks to what might be going on. Now, huge explosions in Rostov. What we do know happened, and this is why why I think something funky must be going on, because we do get battle damage assessment that comes out, and here's a successful strike, and there's loads of images and videos of this strike. This is a railway station in Rostov that is absolutely shellacked by the Ukrainians, and I think it's for the second time in 2 days, because this also got affected yesterday and it led to over 100 trains being delayed. This is Kamenolomny station in Rostov region. The station serves large freight flows, loading, unloading, receiving, issuing whole and carload shipments, assembly of trains is carried out on access roads and open areas, and that has been badly hit by the Ukrainians there. And we heard, well, Ukraine has struck the train station and two adjacent buildings located at, it gives you Intel Schizo here, gives you the coordinates. Looks like they completely missed the locomotive depot and a wagon repair depot, which is over a kilometre away. The annual volume of repair work is 2.6 thousand cars. And that is Intel Schizo, replying to those images that we just seen. The main train station building was also struck. That's what you can see in those images. So it looks like Ukraine is aiming for rail infrastructure, and they've been doing that for some time, also in occupied areas like Zaporizhzhia, so hitting trains that are delivering supplies to the frontline forces. But I think Russia is now really starting to hit Ukraine's railway infrastructure. And we've wondered, I say we because people in the comments have also done this over the course of the war, wondered why Russia hasn't hit railway infrastructure really at all, or not largely, over the course of the war. And is it because they really want that railway infrastructure? So if they take back control of Ukraine, or take back control, if they successfully invade and capture large parts of Ukraine, I guess they would want the railway infrastructure to be in place rather than have to build it all again, and they can use that then. So the more territory they take, the more they can use the railway infrastructure that they take for their own supply. So they might see it as counterproductive to destroy too much railway infrastructure. But then, if you're looking at railway infrastructure much further to the west, I'm surprised they haven't taken shots at that. But maybe they have. Maybe that happens when we don't hear about the success of the Russian drones. So there are loads of questions I have with regard to the Russian attacks of railway infrastructure, and often the lack of attacks. Now, this is a worrying sight. Why is it a worrying sight? We have a Lyuty drone, a Ukrainian drone here. This is one of the mainstays of the Ukrainian drone repertoire. This is what I think the Germans might be helping to produce at scale. And here we have a Russian interceptor drone. Interesting video because it tries a number of times to take this out and then kind of gets, I don't know whether the thrust of the propellers, the propeller of the Lyuty throws the FPV drone away, and then eventually it does have a go, but then it gets thrown. It does get much closer to it, but then it gets thrown really off course, like it gets thrown downwards. It comes back for another pop, and eventually one assumes it takes it out. Now the worry here is that we know that Ukrainians are developing interceptor drones at a real they scaled up the production of them. They are producing them as quickly and as much as possible in order to fight off the Shahed drones. Or if the Russians are successful in producing their own interceptor drones at scale, then that's obviously going to be a challenge for the Ukrainians and their drone strikes into Russia. Russia's a much bigger country, but of course you've got the same amount of border. Both countries have the same amount of border because they both border each other's countries, over which most of the drones are going to be flying. Right? It's not many drones that are going to be coming via other countries. So most drones are going to be going over the front line, over the borders. So both sides should be able to position interceptor drones in the same kind of way, and there's no asymmetry there between Russia having much more land to cover. Russia's a much bigger country, right? So it has much more land to cover in terms of defending all of that airspace with air defense systems, and they have all these facilities all over Russia, and so that's a real challenge. But those drones have to pass over the same amount of land for same amount of border for each country, and so there's no asymmetry there. Even though Russia's a bigger country, the amount of borders are the same, is what I'm saying. And what I would hope is that the Ukrainians, thank you, Ivan, I'm doing my Russian there, but what I would hope is that the Ukrainians can keep their asymmetrical advantage there of being ahead of the game with interceptor drones, and that's showing that the Russians are at least creating some interceptor drones. Okay, this goes on to what I was referencing earlier with regard to what could be going on with the Ukrainian strikes not bringing too much, I think, successful destruction of Russian targets, right? Visioner has a pop at this. For 2 days now, Ukrainian forces have been continuously launching large waves of kamikaze drones towards various regions of Russia, including Moscow, and there are several reasons for this strategy. So this might not be so much to do with why we're seeing a lack of battle damage, but what are the Ukrainians trying to do? And it could be that actually the main target isn't so much at the moment destroying stuff, but scoping out Russian air defenses. So he says, first, the Ukrainians aim to overload Russian air defense systems while simultaneously identifying their weak points. This helps them determine and prepare safe corridors for potential major strikes in the future. So on the one hand, they want to find out where the Russian air defenses are and maybe even strike those at some point or overwhelm them. But on the other hand, find out where they're not. And that ends up being a safe route for Ukrainian drones, and this is exactly what the Russians have done in Ukraine over 3 years. So the Russians have spent 3 years scoping out Ukrainian air defenses, and it's always going to be changing, right? So it's nothing that's set in stone, but you're always trying to find out where the weaknesses are for the other side and where their strengths are, and you avoid their strengths, as well as sometimes trying to take out their strengths. So as I say, you can either try and take out the air defenses or try and evade the air defenses. So first, Ukrainians aim to overload and then find their weak points, and then they can prepare safe corridors for potential major strikes in the future. So it's not so much about blowing stuff up now. It's about maybe losing a lot of drones in order to prepare for massive future strikes. So when the Germans are going to bring in their high 3-digit number of co-produced and co-funded, maybe Luti drones, maybe missiles, who knows for sure. This is the work that is being done to prep for that. So you might recall that the German General Freuding confirmed that German-Ukrainian long-range, he says, missiles, I'm not 100% sure that's the case, will soon begin striking deep inside Russian territory. These drone attacks are essentially laying the groundwork for those strikes, helping to map out the battlefield and identify the most effective missile routes. So that could be why we aren't seeing so much damage being done at the moment. It's all about finding out the safest routes. Okay, Kiev has been suffering from floods. Russia has been suffering in various places. Moscow, we saw recently, had huge flooding there, big flooding in Kiev as well, as there is, I think, in a number of places around the world at the moment. For those who know Kiev, this won't come as a great surprise. Heavy summer storms and a city full of hills are conducive to flash floods. The capital's suffering again today, says Tim White there. We have Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine face a deepening humanitarian catastrophe, with some towns not having received any water for 4 months. Endemic corruption and systemic mismanagement by the Russian-installed authorities is being blamed for the situation. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this. This is like a 38, I think, post thread. This is a huge Chryso Wiki thread. But some of these places in occupied Luhansk and Donetsk, including the major cities like Donetsk city itself, what was I reading the other day, that they got water every third day or something like that. There are some pretty dodgy conditions going on there that I think are reflective of Russia's inability to manage resources. They are all about liberating, and liberation just looks like flattening places, and when they do control them, not investing nearly enough in supporting the civilians there because they're spending all the money on blowing up other places. Yeah, might be worth me looking into that whole thread as a separate extra video maybe. Tucker Carlson's at it again. He says that the US underestimated Russia's economy and civilization. Absolute balderdash. Quote, we kicked them out of SWIFT, so that's the international payment system, and ended up hurting ourselves more. And if that wasn't enough, this is in an interview with Bild, a German tabloid newspaper. He also said in that interview, your country, Germany, is going down. Russia is on the rise. You should be angry with your leaders. Instead, you're angry with Putin. Of course you're angry with Putin. He's invading a European nation. And by the way, Russia is not on the rise. Like, only an absolute Egypt could think that. I really want to know if Tucker Carlson genuinely believes that, or if this is part of some kind of political grift. Like, does he really actually think Russia is on the rise? Is he in an information bubble whereby that is the information he is reading and receiving? Answers on a postcard. President Zelensky has announced on July the 19th, so 2 days ago, that Ukraine has proposed a new round of peace talks with Russia for next week. So potentially Istanbul peace talks are going to take place. He's also had a meeting with his Minister of Foreign Affairs and the office team, so that's Andrei Sybiha. He's appointed 16 ambassadors. So remember, you've had a change in the cabinet. You've got a new prime minister, you've got a new defense minister, a new US ambassador. We define personal tasks and criteria for assessing performance. We will define the key priorities of Ukrainian diplomacy for the next 6 months. Then you have Ukraine's former commander-in-chief, Valery Zaluzhny. He's revealed why breakthrough operations became impossible. Electronic warfare killed precision weapons, but autonomous weapons restore offensives by 2027. Ukraine has 2 years to build critical capabilities or face catastrophe. So he's saying, and we can see this with drones. Yeah, drones are now being equipped with terminal phase targeting, so that they can't be electronically interfered with. You need precision guided weapons like your HIMARS and probably Storm Shadows and ATACMS and all sorts. They need resilience in terms of electronic warfare. You need autonomous weapons to restore an advantage for the Ukrainians. That's what Zaluzhny has been saying. Something I need to look into in more detail, but it's been a long one already. Russian state television, according to Anton Gerashenko, has aired a new expose. It turns out that Azerbaijani special services, quote, using their diasporas in Russia, assisted Ukrainian intelligence in carrying out their sabotage terrorist operation Spiderweb, which aimed to strike Russia's strategic air force. So the Russians are now blaming the Azerbaijanis for helping out with Operation Spiderweb. There is a very bad relationship that is deteriorating between those two nations at the moment. And there's more on that in my geopolitics video, but it is going from bad to worse at the moment between Azerbaijan and Russia. And now Russia are blaming them for helping out with Operation Spiderweb. The broadcast claimed that Azerbaijani diaspora in Russia was involved in providing logistics for the armed forces of Ukraine. Quote, that's precisely why Russian security services are now carrying out operations to neutralize Azerbaijani diasporas, which function as an intelligence outpost of the Azerbaijani special services, working in close coordination with the Ukrainian ones, they say. So where the Russians are coming down heavily on diaspora communities of Azerbaijanis in Russia, they are now connecting this to Ukraine, because of course Ukraine is the fundamental bogeyman for the Russians, and everything bad must be connected to Ukraine, whether it be like the Crocus City terrorist attacks by the Tajiks who were striking out from some kind of Islamic fundamentalist point of view. That was still the Ukrainians' fault, right, at base. Okay, we're going to end on a nice bit of positive. So remember that Usyk won the boxing match against British boxer Dubois. Here's another British boxer, Derek Chisora, saying, and I love this, and I love Usyk here.
Mate, can you do us a favour? Can you stop beating us up? No.
I love the camaraderie there.
Can you do us a favour? Can you stop beating us up? No.
Absolutely love that. Just a bit of joy there. Well done to Usyk. And a bit of spam. Thanks to Stephen Bendel. Look at those beautiful NAFO mugs. I'm drinking from my Ukraine mug here, which is Russian warship, go F yourself, written on the side there. But my NAFO one, chef's kiss. Anyway, take care, everybody. Good to talk to you again. It's been a long one. Lots to talk about and lots more still to come. Toodle pips.